Holy smoking fireworks, Batman. It got wild. The prosecution gets into this. So Pavel goes to his Tacoma, and the prosecution said, did you notice anything in the back that wasn't there before? And Pavel says, yes. I saw a red bucket containing a blue hoodie in the back of the Tacoma. And he said he'd never seen that hoodie before. Well, all of a sudden, there's a sidebar. Then the jury gets excused. So they're going to argue about something. Well, there was a sweatshirt in a lawyer's office that was seized by the state police. And it's this blue sweatshirt. And there was an issue that it should never have been seized and all this. The state police had it. They tested that sweatshirt for DNA. And all over the interior of the sweatshirt was Pavel's DNA. But Pavel had denied to the police that it was his. And then when he was confronted with the fact that, well, your DNA is all over it, he said, well, actually, I did have something like that, so I guess it could be mine. Right? When this was seized by police from the lawyer's office, it was in a box. And inside this box were some tools, that sweatshirt, and a letter from this defense attorney to this other attorney related to the Troconis case. The state later tried to get this defense attorney disqualified, said, hey, he's a witness because chain of custody, right? How did he come into possession of this sweatshirt and blah, all about this sweatshirt? So the state didn't want the defense to be allowed to use this sweatshirt because remember, the DNA came back to Pavel. So the state didn't want the defense to be allowed to use this sweatshirt at all. But here they are now bringing it up. Well, here's what's going on with that. In order to get the state to drop the issue of disqualifying the defense. Oh, and by the way, the defense in turn tried to get the state disqualified. So there was a back and forth, and the defense attorney had to hire his own attorney, and there was a big thing. Finally, they agreed before, so the defense's attorney and the attorney for the state hammered out this agreement that if this defense counsel would agree not to introduce the contents of this box that was seized from that other attorney's office. If Schohorn agreed to not introduce these items, then the state would withdraw this whole issue of getting him disqualified. And the reason he could be disqualified is because he becomes a witness. So they agree on this. So it shouldn't come in, you'd think, right? No. Through all of this, the defense had agreed that, okay, we're going to proceed as if that sweatshirt didn't exist because it may not end up to be relevant anyway. We can go without it. So the jury was never supposed to hear that. And by the way, all this arguing, the jury's not hearing any of this. But now the prosecution has purposely brought it up. And the defense is saying, well, hey, wait a minute. You said this couldn't be brought in. And the prosecutor's like, you can't bring it in, but I can bring it in. Oh, and guess what? You can't really cross-examine on it. So now the defense is denied their right to cross-examination. So they're saying to the judge, hey, wait a minute. This is fundamentally unfair. You denying the defense a right to cross-examination. So they argue back and forth about this. It was really something. And I really thought the judge was going to side with, look, if it comes in, he can cross-examine. If the state is introducing it, the state who originally didn't want it introduced, right? And the state saying, yeah, well, he can't introduce it, but we didn't ever really agree that we wouldn't use it somehow. Just he can't use it the way he wants, but we can use it the way we want. This was crazy. Apparently, anyway, not being able for the state to be able to say what they want and the defense to not be able to cross-examine is prejudicial, right? So then the prosecution in this hearing says, well, when we're talking about this sweatshirt in the bucket, we're not saying it was in the box at the attorney's office. We're not saying that. The defense says, okay, well, if I'm not allowed to cross-examine on things in the box, and you're saying you're not saying this sweatshirt was in the box, then I can cross-examine on it. And it turns out there's a portion of Pavel's police interview where the police confront him with this sweatshirt and say, this is your sweatshirt. And he says, no, it's not. But Pavel, your DNA, it's full of your DNA. It's everywhere inside this shirt. So then Pavel backpedaled and said, yeah, well, I do have sweatshirts like that, but I thought that one was darker than the one I had and this sort of thing. So in the hearing today, the defense says, okay, well, if the prosecution is saying this is not the one in the box, then I can cross-examine on it. And then the court says, well, the stipulation, the agreement in the other hearing about not introducing what's in the box is going to be read by the court pretty broadly. So that means that the defense can't introduce the evidence, and that seems okay because he isn't. But he adds, the defense can't even introduce the evidence on cross-examination. So completely ties the hands of the defense. I mean, I don't know how they're going to get around not having an appeal on this case if she's convicted. This just was something. So then the defense is saying, well, but Pavel had this police interrogation where he was confronted with this sweatshirt that has his DNA all over it. And ultimately, so they went back and forth, but ultimately he can't cross-examine on that either. And so he was understandably not happy. And the prosecution said, well, it's not the court. It's not us that's tying his hands. He tied his own hands by agreeing to this. And honestly, this just, to me, feels like revenge on the part of the prosecution. They wanted him disqualified. They wanted him off the case, and they couldn't do it. So they're going to stick it to him now. The problem is, who it gets stuck to is the defendant. So now the defense has to try and navigate this with his hands tied behind his back. So this was something.